You're on your way to see your wife and kid. They're gonna be real happy to see you.
While Insomniac sees continuous success with every new Ratchet & Clank game, one member of the family is bound to be ignored by the masses. Resistance is one of the biggest IPs of the PlayStation 3 that Sony could greatly benefit from in the current age of gaming. Well, that's what some may tell you. In recent years, there has been an uptick in the number of PlayStation fans begging for Sony to greenlight a new game set in the Resistance series, or, at the very least, give us a collection of ports or remasters. But was it ever as big as we perceive it to be?
Shit! What the hell was that?
It's stalkers! They know we're human! So quit yapping and land already!
Welcome to MojoPlays. My name is Ty, and today we'll be taking a look at the mysterious disappearance of the Resistance franchise. Before we begin, we publish new videos all week long, so be sure to subscribe and ring the bell to be notified about our latest videos. Resistance was a rather interesting departure from the visual aesthetic Insomniac was known for in the late 1990s and early 2000s.
Say, look here, who brought the yank?
With the exception of their debut title, the gritty and action-heavy Disruptor, Insomniac Games was known primarily for cutesy cartoony games like Spyro the Dragon and Ratchet & Clank. While the former IP would continue under Universal Interactive due to publisher ownership, Insomniac would continue working closely with Sony and belt out several Ratchet & Clank games for the PlayStation 2. However, as the 7th generation of gaming was approaching the horizon, it was time for Sony and its partners to start recognizing where the industry was heading. The PlayStation 2 was already diving into online gaming with a small selection of titles, but now was the time to go full force with the PlayStation 3.
I'm outside. Where are you?
Right, we see you now.
Though the PS3 wouldn't launch for another year and a half, Sony already began showing demos starting at E3 2005.
Here we have a battle in Manchester between a bunch of Chimeran hybrids and humans. We've got a lot of guys shooting at each other. They're also shooting at me, but since I'm in God mode, they can't really hurt me.
One of these demos was simply known as I-8, and it was a first-person shooter that blended World War II with menacing alien invaders. Gone were the days of colorful dragons and gems. In comes the beginning of realistic, gritty action games, or as some may call it, the piss filter era of gaming. Though at the time, this was considered a technical achievement in games. Just this demo alone showcased how much more detailed textures could get, how much smoother polygons could be, and ultimately, how games could get more immersive with better fidelity and interactivity. Strangely enough, Sony would never mention the game's release date, only the official name via a presentation at the 2006 Game Developers Conference. Resistance: Fall of Man released on November 11, 2006 as one of the PlayStation 3's launch titles. It didn't receive critical acclaim, but reviews were universally positive overall, with some outlets calling it the best of the PS3's launch titles. Not that there was that much competition in the launch lineup between Ridge Racer 7, Call of Duty 3, Tony Hawk's Project 8, Genji: Days of the Blade, you know, the giant enemy crab game based on famous battles that actually took place in Japan, as the dev said. Though it resembled military shooters we had seen before, the incorporation of aliens already made Resistance much more interesting. What was even more compelling was how the game changed depending on your actions. These weren't simple good or bad moral choices, but rather what you focus on shooting at in the fight. Shoot a chimera that's attacking your troop and your allies live to fight alongside you in the next mission. Focus solely on shooting chimera and you might end up becoming a one-man army before you know what's happening. This alone could determine how much easier or harder the rest of the game could turn out for you, and folks loved it. In less than a year, Resistance sold more than 2 million copies, making it an incredibly strong start for not just the PlayStation 3, but Insomniac's brand new IP. The game would eventually flatline at just shy of 4 million copies sold. There was no question that a sequel needed to start production immediately.
Former friends and neighbors now lie in storm drains, limbs twisted in ways I can't begin to describe.
As with most sequels, the idea behind Resistance 2 was to increase the scale of the universe, make the Chimera bigger, make the world bigger, make the cinematics bigger, make the animations bigger, make the marketing and the merchandise bigger. If Resistance Fall of Man was to be the big kickoff for PS3, Resistance 2 was going to be the home run and really push the technology while delivering a compelling game. To really drive the hype, enigmatic websites were published that detailed stories about super soldiers, advertised newsletters from an organization called the Alliance for American Autonomy, included postcards with mysterious phone numbers, and contained secret documents talking about the Chimera. With this much buzz, Resistance 2 was bound to be the biggest title the PS3 had seen yet. Resistance 2 launched on November 4th, 2008, and the critical reception was roughly the same as the first game. Critics loved the campaign and the online multiplayer, but noted how much slower the movement was, an odd downgrade compared to previous games Insomniac had made before. Criticism towards Resistance 2 grew from players as more people pointed out how unreasonably difficult the game was compared to its predecessor.
How long do I have?
3 hours. If we are lucky.
Regardless of these crucial flaws, Resistance 2 wound up receiving several awards from a handful of gaming outlets. Sales were roughly the same too, if not a few 100,000 higher. Still, plenty of reason to keep the train rolling with a third game.
Damn it! This ambush is going to hell!
Unlike the first two games, Resistance 3 had actually leaked before Sony or Insomniac could say anything about the IP's next game. Columbia Pictures, one of Sony's movie silos, had begun production on Battle Los Angeles in 2009, less than a year after Resistance 2 had been released. Sony wouldn't announce the game until August 2010. What followed after was a bit of a strange marketing campaign compared to the last two games. Rather than talk about improvement, story, and all the juicy tidbits that a marketing exec would gush over with buzzwords, Resistance 3's marketing focused almost entirely on the game's weaponry, with short clips called the Lab Video Series. Some typical behind-the-scenes clips were published, but they were far fewer this time around. Resistance 3 launched on September 6, 2011, and critically performed, well, roughly the same as the other two. Some outlets found it to be the best game in the franchise, while others took umbrage with the environments and level design. Online multiplayer also saw a few more hiccups than Resistance 2 did, but also played a little faster. But the most shocking part of its launch was just how abysmal Resistance 3 did commercially. Sales during the first week amounted to no more than 200,000 copies sold, a horrid amount when the first two games surpassed 500,000 before the end of their respective launch weeks. The game never fully recovered after that.
Hello? Not even sure if this thing's working.
To further showcase how bad the commercial performance was, we can refer to the massive data breach Insomniac Games suffered back in December 2023. Among the ocean of information leaked across PlayStation Network and secret documents was sales data centered on Insomniac's entire library of games that were released on PlayStation 3 as well as PlayStation 4. According to these documents, Resistance 3 cost roughly $37 million to make, yet only achieved a little over $73 million in net sales. In other words, the game only made twice its budget back before flatlining.
What do you think would happen if one of those terraformers fell out of the sky?
You mean fall out of the sky on top of that tower over there?
That's exactly what I mean.
In the eyes of normal customers such as you and I, this may be enough to call Resistance 3 a success. Any amount of profit is better than no profit at all, right? Well, if you're running a company like Insomniac Games, that simply isn't the result you want. When working in movies, TV, and even video games in the AAA space, you want to make more than double your budget back so that you can cushion the company should future projects and business deals fall through. Unless you're a smaller team like Supergiant Games or Yacht Club Games, getting double your budget back isn't going to fly if you need new staff, new equipment, a new building to relocate to, and more to continue normal operations. Plus, before this point, Insomniac Games was making nearly triple its budgets back or more with every single game. So what about Resistance 3 made it sell so abysmally compared to everything else Insomniac had done? Was it the weird approach in marketing? Did the reception stem from the changes made in Resistance 2, causing players to leave the franchise entirely? The answer might lie right outside of Insomniac's offices.
Susan, what are you doing? We gotta get out of here.
I am tired of watching my son die.
Susie, we gotta go.
See, even though the first two Resistance games sold really well, the PlayStation 3 was in constant turmoil since its launch in 2006. As multi-platform games began popping up, players began noticing differences between the PS3 and its competitor, the Xbox 360. Much of the general public found the Xbox 360's controller to be more durable and responsive compared to the PS3's DualShock 3 controller. On top of that, the performance of most multi-platform games was often unbearable on PlayStation 3, with constant frame dipping, screen tearing, and sometimes slightly longer load times. It didn't help that Microsoft was really aggressive with marketing deals and pushing for ads that tied games closer to Xbox. On the development side of things, many studios found it easier to develop games on the Xbox 360 and even the Nintendo Wii compared to the PS3. As we've learned in recent years, the PS3 had entirely different structures in cell processors, making it much more difficult to get games running properly on a PS3. All of this would cause Sony to get left behind until the early 2010s, when Naughty Dog was cranking out Uncharted games and Insomniac kept trucking along with Ratchet and Resistance. But that's just a general overview of the problem. Another major contributing factor to Resistance 3's commercial failure can be attributed to two other things: the Xbox 360's dominance and Call of Duty. By 2011, many folks had already chosen Xbox 360 as their platform, while the kids were gravitating more towards the Wii. And when all three Modern Warfare games caused Call of Duty to explode and become a global phenomenon, it's going to be a lot harder to get folks to drop their favorite first-person shooter and try a new first-person shooter, one that may not run as well or feel as great to play as something like Call of Duty. None of this is to say Resistance 3 is an objectively bad game. If anything, it was a victim of circumstance, and what really drove the final nail in the coffin was the game that came after.
She's infected!
What are you talking about? Let go of me!
Let go of her, Private, or I will take your head off!
In between the releases of Resistance 2 and Resistance 3, we got a PSP spin-off from Bend Studio in 2009 called Resistance Retribution. Though it didn't play like the mainline games on console, Retribution was and still is regarded as one of the most fun games released on PSP, and Sony wanted to try and replicate that success with their next handheld console. 8 months after the launch of Resistance 3, we saw Resistance Burning Skies. Released on PlayStation Vita and developed by Nihilistic Software, Burning Skies was quickly dismissed as the worst entry in the franchise due to its lackluster multiplayer, bland visuals, and forgettable story. If Resistance 3's commercial performance wasn't a sign of the times, Burning Skies ruined any chance of the IP continuing as normal.
The beacon is on that tower. We gotta figure out a way to get it down.
Despite all of this, Insomniac Games was still willing and ready to move forward with a Resistance 4.
Company Insomniac has grown so big. Now they have over 400 people. It's amazing. Yeah.
Alas, this was not meant to be, as we would learn in 2021. In June 2021, ex-IGN editor and founder of Last Stand Media, Colin Moriarty, revealed that Insomniac had pitched Resistance 4 to Sony, but was rejected due to the number of post-apocalyptic games that were already in the works. Two projects related to the rejection included Naughty Dog's The Last of Us and Bend Studios' Days Gone, which would release in 2013 and 2019 respectively.
I do think Sony is missing that kind of game. A Saints Row or something like that. Some urban, gaudy, comical, over the top.
This was reconfirmed by Insomniac founder Ted Price himself after his departure from Insomniac in February 2025. This bit of news would be expanded upon further after the departure of Sony executive Shuhei Yoshida, who served as president of Sony Interactive Entertainment between 2008 and 2019. In an interview conducted by Moriarty in February 2025, Moriarty asked Yoshida about Sony's departure from the first-person shooter genre, noting the dormancy of Sony IP such as SOCOM, Killzone, and of course, Resistance. Yoshida would explain that online gaming is a, quote, winner-takes-all space, end quote, and that when Call of Duty and Battlefield were dominating the market, Sony executives decided to turn away from the space. As Yoshida recalls, Sony internally recognized that they were known for great single-player games, but not great online service games, which shareholders kept pressing them to pursue. But as investments grew and the industry changed, Sony Interactive Entertainment would change and focus more on PC releases and single-player games rather than online service games.
I don't know. We'll see what happens. We're not going to hear about it for a long time, so gird your loins, boys and girls.
Yoshida's insight holds a ton of weight in regards to Resistance's future or lack thereof. During Resistance's time, players would show up for the explosive campaign, but stayed for the fun multiplayer mode. You essentially got 2 games in one package, and Sony stuck with this format for not just Resistance, but Killzone and Uncharted as well. All 3 franchises saw their own critical and commercial success, yet none are remembered for their multiplayer. They're remembered more for their respective campaigns first and foremost. Fast forward to today, and the only first-person shooter franchise that is still offering single-player and multiplayer components is Call of Duty. Most developers that make first-person shooters are typically sticking with just multiplayer, and often try to break into the online service market. As for single-player-centric first-person shooter games, the only AAA developers that have found success in that format are id Software with Doom and Machine Games with Wolfenstein, both of which are owned by Bethesda and have been around for a long time. You could make a case too for the RPG FPS Fallout, but for the most part, a lot of amazing single-player FPS games either wind up commercial failures like Immortals of Avium, or are finding their own success in the indie market like Ultra Kill. With that in mind, it's important that Sony recognizes the current market, and to do so, it's going to need to reflect and ask itself some questions. Some really tough questions. We in the PlayStation community need to do the same. In 2025, we are facing glaring issues in market saturation as more and more companies are trying to break into the space. If Resistance were to get a brand new game, would we show up like we did for Fall of Man in Resistance 2? Or would the new game be largely ignored and buried by the competition, just as Resistance 3 was? If a new game were to release, would it be able to churn a profit from being only single player? Or would people be expecting a multiplayer component like they did back then? Would we all be okay with a Resistance game being only multiplayer? Heck, with every month being loaded with big releases, is there even any room for Resistance between what's already in the works at Insomniac and what the competition is working on right now? If we even start right now, would the IP even have any relevance a few years from the outcry that's coming and going now?
I'd say that's a hell of an idea, Joe. And a hell of a way to get us all killed.
These are all questions that none of us really have an answer to in the end. While it's easy to chalk up Resistance's untimely end to a couple of turns gone horribly wrong, it's also been so long since Resistance 3 and Burning Skies that it's hard to say if the IP has any future to begin with. It may as well be a brand new IP in the eyes of the current market, and that's a risk almost every AAA developer and publisher just does not want to take in this day and age. Sony especially. There have been acknowledgements on social media and in sizzle reels that the franchise did exist at one point in PlayStation's history, but outside of that, the games are just a blip of PS3 heritage that you can stream on PS5 and PS4, while Retribution can be purchased and downloaded like a normal game.
Burrell wasn't acting alone. The government let him do this. They're desperate.
What?
Each one of these cubes gives them enough power to control a giant stink.
Perhaps there is a chance for Resistance to come back, but in order to show Sony that people want this game, PlayStation fans are going to need to be more vocal and actively show up. It will probably take the same amount of effort the FGC showed for Marvel vs. Capcom in 2021.
It's been 13 years. 13 years since Marvel vs. Capcom 2 has been re-released, in any way.
And that was a whole years-long endeavor that required several notable streamers to participate, hordes of dedicated fans showing up to televised events with signs, constant hashtags across social media, support through merchandise from external partners like Arcade1Up, and developers voicing their unrelenting passion and desire for said IP to return. It was not an easy feat, and after all of that, we finally got a collection of Marvel vs. Capcom games in 2024. 7 long years after Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite nearly killed the franchise. Can Resistance fans do the same?
What are you saying?
Because if we truly want Resistance to come back, we might have to do exactly what MVC fans did, but twice or thrice as hard. And as most hardcore PlayStation fans should know by now, Sony doesn't like going back to the well, and they rarely ever do. Perhaps with Hideaki Nishino acting as the new CEO of Sony Interactive Entertainment, maybe there is a chance. Perhaps with the supposed internal talks of reviving Sly Cooper and Ape Escape, maybe there is hope. Perhaps with the new leadership at Insomniac Games, maybe we can get a break from Marvel and Ratchet. But only time will tell.
Sorry, sir. I'm taking a squad to Bryce Canyon to extract Malachon.
This isn't a debate, Lieutenant. I won't sacrifice a Sentinel leader for a scientist. You're going back to base, and that's...
Did you play any of the Resistance games for yourself? If so, what was your favorite memory with the franchise? Let us know down in the comments, and be sure to subscribe to MojoPlays for more great videos every day.